We're good.
You go ahead and turn off your video and audio, and then go ahead and start the stream.
Oh, here, Doug Mansler. Okay, he just joined in. Good. And I admitted him so that he should be, when we go live, he should be there.
Hold on a second.
Are we good to go, or the graphic's still there?
We'll drop the graphic when we're live.
Okay, great. It just
We're live.
usually faster than this.
We're rolling.
I just tried to admit Doug Mansler, and I got the, and okay, there he is. Okay, great, awesome. All right, ready to get started? I want to thank the members of MPF who joined us today, and I want to encourage you, if you have a point to add to the discussion anytime, kind of just give me a wave and I'll get you in. We value your input a lot. I know that you put a lot of time and effort and sweat and blood and tears into this process, and I appreciate it, and I want to thank you for showing up today. Meeting that we're going to discuss today is basically one of the items I inherited in my committee, the building tear down aesthetics. With regard to that, on January 27th, President Joe Stoner presented a document created by MPF task force that attempted to address some inadequacies in our code. So I want to take a section and read to you the charge that the Architectural Review Board and Preservation Foundation have in our code book. So this is section 151.025 under the powers and duties of the Architectural Review Board. It talks about the board as a historic preservation committee. The Architectural Review Board shall be the Historic Preservation Commission of the municipality and shall have the following powers and duties. In conjunction with the Village Preservation Foundation and the State Historic Preservation Office, to conduct a continuing survey of cultural resources in the community, to make recommendations for designation of local historic districts, landmarks, and historic sites to the Village Council, according to section 151.075. Point 2, in conjunction with the Village Preservation Foundation, to advise Village Council regarding the protection of the village cultural resources. Point 3, in conjunction with the Village Preservation Foundation and other historic archaeological experts, to review and facilitate all proposed National Register nominations for properties within the village. In conjunction with the Preservation Foundation, to work toward the continuing education of village citizens regarding
struggling with working out at home.
Historic preservation issues. So I want to thank Eileen and Don, Joe, Bob, Doug, Mary Beth, and I also participate in this process, not only for joining us today, but for also serving on the task force and taking the initiative to comply with that part of the code that I just read. This is something in the past that MPF hasn't really worked in conjunction with council. And this is a great step in moving forward in the future to doing that and having an ongoing dialogue between these two bodies. The document that MPF presented to council addressed 3 issues: exterior demolition, which was new, building height, yard and court regulation, which was a rewrite, and new construction that was new. We have a time constraint today of an hour because Avia's meeting is coming after this one. And also, these are really complex issues. There's a lot of moving parts and facets. So for the purposes of today's discussion, I want to limit it to the demolition portion only. So that's what we'll be talking about. It's my hope that we'll have a discussion and we'll come out with some actionable next steps that for council and or the MPF task force to take place. Before we start discussion, I just want to note that there are over 75 municipalities in Ohio that have local preservation ordinances that are certified by the National Park Service. Examples other than Mariemont include Glendale, Montgomery, Loveland, Cincinnati, and those are just the ones that are relatively local. Like I said, there's over 75 statewide. I think I will start then by reading the ordinance that was presented, and we'll go from there. It says, this is approved by the Mariemont Preservation Foundation on January 23rd, 2020, and presented to council on January 27th. And this is, again, a new ordinance for exterior demolition. It says, the building commissioner shall review all demolition applications for all buildings within the village. The demolition of existing buildings shall not be unreasonably denied. The building commissioner can approve permits for exterior demolition that are required for public safety and shall refer all other exterior demolition applicants to the ARB for review. If an application is denied, the property owner may appeal to the ruling to the planning commission. And then it goes to list the following criteria that are considered an evaluation and an application of exterior demolition. And I'm just going to kind of gloss over those. Are public safety, commercial property, dwellings and accessory buildings, non-significant items, and buildings. And I would like to mention that outside of the historic district, Mariemont does not have any existing code that regulates demolition. So it is regulated within the historic district, but not anywhere else. Does anybody want to comment?
So I had to go upstairs and resolve a situation in the living room. So I missed the very first part of what you said. Were you, I have all the paperwork. So was that what you were reading just now was one of the suggestions made in Joe's document from
Joe Stoner's document.
Yeah. So with regard to the demolition.
And that's meant as a starting point. It wasn't meant to serve as, written code. That's for our, counselor to decide.
Yeah, so the only comment I had, well, kind of two. So I was looking through our code and there is, in the most cases, the appeal body is council, not the planning commission. And so that's, I just feel like, that's kind of up for discussion. And secondarily, when I've looked at other municipalities that have historic districts, to me, just having read several of them, it seems more.
Which ones did you read specifically, Maggie? I gave you Glendale.
Yeah, I have Glendale. So to be clear, some of them were cities, which the way they operate are different from villages. So over time, like I read Bellevue, I've read, there's one like north of Columbus that I was looking at for a couple of years, looking at various things, but it wasn't all that useful in the end. But they had some interesting code. But I guess the point is that when you have a historic district and you have like an ARB, and the ARB generally deals with properties in the historic district, that's their charge. It seems like to me, if we're going to talk about having demolition language in our code, the demolition language that the ARB would rule on should stick with the historical properties, and that the building commissioner's role would be the person, that would be the correct place for all of the other demolition, like permission to come from, like things outside of a historic district, things that are not a historic landmark, things that are not otherwise designated store.
Don, would you like to comment on that? You need to unmute yourself, and then I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Can you hear us? Don? Can you hear us?
There we go.
Yeah, he
Sorry.
just
I was-
unmuted. Thank you, Don.
Can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good. The issue happens with, there are a number of properties in Mariemont. And I hate to keep bringing it up, but one of the ones that's been at issue was one that's down on Mount Vernon Avenue, which was the first house that was built on Mount Vernon, was built in 1929. That house was going to be demolished. And we were able to go into the code and find a place where we can ask them to stall for 30 days while we think about it. We didn't have anything in the code that said we had the right to do that, except that we can, before they get the demolition permit, we can ask them for 30 days to think about it.
Mhm.
In the process of doing that, we were able to delay enough that they decided that they would sell the house rather than tear it down and build another one. And fortunately that happened. The house was remodeled, but it looks very much like the original one. And so we were successful in that kind of by manipulating. But there are other houses in Mariemont that are not in the historic district that are very much like that.
Mhm. So that kind of brings me to my second point. One of the charges within the list of things that Marcy read, so the list is actually 8 things long. We read the first 4. So I know when Dan was mayor, we talked a lot about working on the map of Mariemont that would have the historic districts laid out clearly on the map, and then have historic landmarks similarly labeled, and then also to go forward and from that point determine which were contributing versus the non-contributing buildings. And once we had that, it would be a little more grounds for something like that to stand on. If we needed to try to have somebody not tear something down, we could say, look, this has been, deemed a contributing building, and so we're not going to let you tear it down. And also it would give the ARB jurisdiction over something like that, as opposed to it just being, the house down the street that's not necessarily a contributing structure. And to my knowledge, we haven't gotten that together yet, which I think needs to be part of this discussion, because I think you need to get the board, figured out, and the right people on the board as far as having the right training and that kind of thing. And then you also have to have a premise to begin with, which would be this map, where we've already made decisions about what is and what isn't contributing or historic before we can start talking about how to get around demolition. Because we kind of, depending on who you are, got lucky on that last one. I mean, I liked that house a lot. I'm glad it didn't get torn down, but we could have been, in trouble if we told people, no, you can't tear this house down. I mean, there's a balance between the individual property owner's rights. There's a balance in preservation, and I agree with the history. But
all right, Maggie, Eileen is kind of waving her hand. Eileen, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the idea of getting a list of contributing properties. Are you hearing an echo?
Yeah,
a little bit.
Real quick, somebody is playing the YouTube on their computer and needs to turn it off.
yeah. Somebody used the wrong link and is tuned into both meetings, and that's why you're getting the echo.
There you go. It might be me if I'm hearing an echo from you, so just give me.
It's Eileen.
Yeah, okay, give her a second.
I think. Yeah, no. Oh, she said that. My apologies. I muted her, so if you guys want to continue with the meeting while she takes care of that, you should just be able to close the browser.
Well, I think we kind of needed to hear from her, because she had, because this is something that the committee did discuss at length about the whole idea of contributing and non-contributing. There she is.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Much better, thanks, great.
Okay.
Awesome. I did the same thing last week, Eileen, so don't feel bad.
Oh,
Yes,
thank
you
you.
did.
I need help trying to get the picture back though. Oh,
We
there,
can see you.
At the bottom of your, did you get it, Ms. Beatty?
got it. Oh,
Okay.
okay. I lost Marcy. I'm on some strange view where I'm seeing Jason IRC on my screen. That's all I see on my screen.
You gotta do the gallery view.
Alrighty, well, I'll talk anyway. I see you now. My comment for the contributing properties is when Millard Rogers put in the application for our National Historic Registry status, he created that. So we have that list. What we do not have is a look at how things have changed since then, because some of those properties have changed so much that they are probably no longer contributing. And so we do have a way that we can get that list updated. So Maggie, we would have exactly what you're talking about. MPF in this effort to put together this proposal hired Beth Sullenberger, an expert in this kind of thing. She assisted in writing the code for Glendale. And she is qualified, if we decide we want to use her services, she is qualified to go look at all of those properties and determine whether they are still contributing. And that would give us our list. That's it.
Thanks.
I'd like to make a few comments, and I'm going to steal a phrase from Joe Stoner. The goal of the task force was to protect the unprotected. And we made the decision as a task force with a lot of debate, hours of it, that if we treated the entire village as the same thing, so we're not saying you're in District A, you're in District B, and also we would protect neighborhoods where flipping had become commonplace, where things that were inappropriate for that location were being done. That was the purpose of this. And I think to say that we want to create different districts, that means someone will just say will be unprotected. So we're trying to protect the entire village, but still have the standards be the standards of that neighborhood. That's it.
Joe, did you have something you want to say? Joe Stoner?
Well, I think Bob and Eileen have covered it. We did do a pictorial inventory at, the beginning of the task force. Marianne Schwartz participated in that, and we drove around and I was part of it. We took pictures of a lot of these properties, and I think that's in a document somewhere. But we did not want to really differentiate. I mean, I think we wanted two basic districts: the historic district, which has its own guidelines, and everybody else. And this proposal is dealing with everybody else, and whether it's contributing or not. Because even looking at the contributing properties that that Miller put together in his appendix to the application, I mean, that's one person's opinion, basically, whether he thought it was or wasn't. And I wouldn't want to rely too much on whether a property is deemed to be contributing or not contributing in regards to this new zoning. I think everybody should be the same, pretty much. If that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, Maggie, I mean, again, I think the reason we came up with the recommendation the way we did is because we didn't want to create a feeling that we're creating a second historic district and trying to create, overly onerous responsibilities on the homeowner. We just wanted to have a stopgap measure because there's nothing there at all now. There's an analogy in medicine. for the heart, there's 3 huge arteries that feed it. And one of them is called the Widowmaker. And it's silent until it's not. And so, we're basically trying to avoid any kind of, egregious loss of a valuable property. And we approached it that way with intention, because we thought that this was the least restrictive way to go about it. Would you agree with me, Eileen and Bob, on that?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, I would.
Do you have anything to add, Eileen?
Well, I think I agree. I agree with the idea that it doesn't necessarily have to be contributing properties. I was just kind of saying that, answering Maggie's question, that we can get that list. But we do need protection for the rest of the village, the entire rest of the village, regardless. Just if nothing else, to give us a chance to evaluate what's happening. And yeah, so I think we do need some kind of stopgap.
I do not disagree.
Don has more, so that Don has the power to do something.
Right.
Oh,
I do
yeah.
not disagree at all. I just think because our existing code does in fact define historic districts and also historic landmarks, and talks about the contributing and non-contributing properties. And Glendale's is actually, I really like their code. They do that also, among other things that I think we should emulate. But I mean, the fact of the matter is we do have 2 districts. They're designated differently. And one is, the purview and under the jurisdiction of the ARB. And I think that there's opportunity in that to very clearly and, to protect those from alterations and from tear downs that are inappropriate. But the fact of the matter is, when you buy a property and you're buying it in a historic district, or it's a landmark, et cetera, you're told that and you have a set of expectations that goes with it. When you buy a property that is not, it's a somewhat different set of expectations. Like, I wouldn't go tear my house down tomorrow, even though it's not a historic landmark, but it's different. It's a different jurisdiction. It's defined currently in the code book differently. It's given a different body to be in charge of it. And I don't think it's more or less onerous. It's just different. It's already.
But agreed, we definitely have the historic district and we need to protect those, and we have code for that. And just to repeat kind of what Bob said, our objective on the task force was to protect the rest of the village. And I think a lot of that, not looking at one house over another, is we want to protect the historic integrity and the character of the entire village. And that's what we were hoping to do. That's what we're hoping to gain some control over. If we continue to let that slide, then property values are going to go down. Not as many people are going to be enamored of Mariemont and how wonderful it is. We run the risk of losing our status. There's all kinds of impacts for not having some kind of control and something in the code.
Yeah, it's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. And what we were trying to do is, deal with those areas outside of the historic district, because National Register listing and NHL designations don't protect properties from demolition. Now, we did have a discussion, and I think this is the point you're trying to make, Maggie, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that we did have some discussion about, should we refer this to the Planning Commission or do we refer this to the ARB? And Eileen or Bob Van Stone would want to talk about why we ended up with the ARB, because I remember we went round and round about that, but I don't remember exactly.
I think it was because a lot of this has to do with architecture the expertise, the body in the village that has more expertise on in that area was the ARB relative to the Planning Commission. So that's why it was done. That's why we decided to do it that way. And we didn't want to create a separate body because we have enough trouble filling those positions on those two boards as it is. So, but if you say you want to take it to the Planning Commission, that's fine. Our thought was there's people with more expertise relative to preservation and architecture on the ARB. And that's why later on, we didn't, Marcy is talking about this first section. We added a section that added this to the purview of the ARB. And
And also that has also, it's kind of just maybe an extension of the ARB's power consistent with that section of code I read.
right.
So that is a change. And, that was listed in the document. Actually,
I just inject something there.
yeah, sure.
It happens that the Planning Commission has a number of things that are basically defined. In other words, the Planning Commission is stated within Ohio state rules with regard to what they're supposed to be about and so forth and so on. And that doesn't really fall within the state guidelines for what the Planning Commission is supposed to do. That's part of the reason for the existence of the ARB.
Listen, Maggie, it might be helpful if you look under the standards for review, the design requirements for a certificate of appropriateness and the designation of what goes into, what you consider to get a certificate of appropriateness, which is what the ARB, gives when it's going to review, something that comes before it as it regards the historic district.
Right. No, I don't think at all that this needs to go for the Planning Commission. It's fine that it's in the ARB.
Yeah.
That's not up for, that's fine.
Then if I could just, this sounds like a good place to inject. I know I've said this to some of you before, it may not be new information, but a particular spot in the village that is not part of the historic district is Center Street. And there's the reasons for that. They went to them and they didn't want it and so forth and so on. But everybody says, well, they're all Tudor style houses. They've all got the necessary brown or light tan color for the stucco. They've got brown boards, all of that. And well, gee, what happens to that district if somebody decides to paint their house a different color? And lo and behold, one of them did. So now we've got an example of what happens. We don't know that anybody's house price is going to go down as a result of that, but the neighborhood has definitely changed. If all you have to do is go and take a quick look, and lo and behold, that particular house is now different from all the rest of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example, and I want to keep us on track with the whole demolition aspects. Joe Stelzer, you've been awfully uncharacteristically quiet.
I've been pretty much listening here to everything that's kind of being talked about. I will say this, that I think we need to tread very carefully here on changing the zoning code, and even if it's just a small step with demolition, because I think we have to be careful that we're not trampling on individuals' property rights, because what we're talking about is a fairly large section of Mariemont that don't have these type of restrictions on the property right now. And what we're trying to do is, or what this proposal is to basically take away some property rights. So I think we better take a look at the legal aspects of this, about whether we have the capability to even do this and withstand a legal challenge, because we could create a fairly large mess from a legal standpoint. I also am a little bit concerned because the criteria to be considered in the evaluation for exterior demolition, there's nothing in here about economic impact. So if somebody wants to do something that could have a positive economic impact, it's not part of the criteria that would be used to determine if a demolition should occur or not. And I bring that point up because the examples that we were given from Beth's report, about some of the problems we've seen in the past, about certain structures being torn down and then other things going up. I actually kind of went out and looked at some of the examples she was giving. And quite frankly, and again, everything's subject to someone's taste, but in my opinion, what went up was probably better than the structures that were there before. The structures had fallen into disrepair, had fallen into a dilapidated position. And so the structures that went up were probably better than the structures that were there before. And I know change is hard, but I think that's, and from an economic standpoint, the structures that went up had a far significant increase in the valuation of those properties.
Yeah,
And
and Joe, we're not saying that, again, we're not saying that, this is, we're not saying they have a carte blanche to say no. This is just an added measure.
And the structures that went up could have been better. We're not saying they should never been changed, but they could have been better.
But Joe, that's your opinion, because there was a developer or a homeowner who put their own capital up or their own dollars up to build what they felt was reasonable for the structure or for the location.
I know, but they're
And
one
so-
person. We have to consider the whole community. That's why we have zoning. And all we're doing is upgrading the zoning.
Upgrading the zoning, but you're taking away some property rights in the process.
Joe, let me address the property right thing, because 2 years ago or so, when I first, was tasked with looking into this, there is, believe it or not, there is an overwhelming amount of case law out there regarding municipalities' rights to zone and regulate based on nothing more than an aesthetic consideration. And that, of course, is based on, the dominant architecture of a community. I mean, if the dominant architecture of a community is Old English, the people within the community can basically say, if a guy comes along and he wants to tear down one of those houses and put up a contemporary design, the community can basically say no to that and on nothing more than aesthetic consideration. And the case law overwhelmingly backs the municipality in those cases.
Hey, Bill, on that, because I know you put a ton of work into that, and I'm looking at this, I think it's the ordinance from 2016 that we voted on.
Mhm.
You'd put a lot of work into it, and I know what we voted on did not encompass a lot of what you wanted to have in it.
Well, it turned out to be very vague.
It turned out to be very big, yes. And then on top of that, because I'm fascinated by this, and I hope that we can come to consensus. I'm looking for that. I just remember the solicitor saying something about how, well, sure, if you ever get challenged, it's probably not constitutional, but I don't think he pointed out in any meetings where I have been what about it was unconstitutional. Like, what do we have to be careful not to tread on, and what can we do to protect properties? And where is that line, and what is the criteria on which it is based?
Well, sort of based on, just based on the reference of what what is the dominant architecture of your community, and that becomes the establishment for your standards. That's essentially it. I mean, you can basically say, again, like I said, if we're a community of essentially older traditional architecture, especially architecture from an earlier time period, we don't want any contemporary houses in here because they're going to clash with what we have. And basically, just based on that metric, the case law essentially says you can do that.
So what's unconstitutional about what we have as far as the aesthetics stuff right now? Because we could just extend that to say demolition, like in kind of what we have, and take care of this.
Well, I think, Maggie, essentially what we were trying to say is that if you apply to the building commissioner for a demolition permit,
Mhm.
we're not saying you can't tear the house down. We're basically just saying, what is it? Show us what you want to replace it with. And we're going to make some kind of a judgment or a standard based on what you want to replace it with. And as long as you're essentially staying within the dominant architecture or the surrounding architecture, especially of the street, good, do it. I mean, usually, to Joe's point, usually what you're tearing down is probably something that is less desirable, dilapidated, or whatever, and replacing it with a new structure has an economic benefit. It's good for the community. It's just that we want to have some say over what the architecture is. What's it going to look like? That's all.
And I would add that, so far we've been tremendously lucky, with what the developers have done here. And, I want to encourage it. These things are not diametrically opposed, but at the same time, it's our due diligence to protect ourselves as a municipality and have some kind of, like I mentioned before, there's over 75 communities in Ohio alone. And I have a link and I can provide that. So
May I make a
I'd
couple
like to
points?
do a couple, yeah, sure. Who's on?
Number one is, as we met as the task force, we realized that most of the people do the right thing in the village. As Marcy just said, we've been very lucky. The second point I wanted to make is in paragraph C, to Joe's point, we did try and put some language in here relative to the economic issues. And if that needs to be enhanced or rewritten, we would encourage that, because exactly what the point Joe made, we just don't want to do that. One of the real points is that there are criteria now, which our consultant said was, you can't just deny a demolition based on, that's the way I feel. So we were trying to write these criteria. And once again, if they need enhanced, changed, whatever, we need to do that. The other point is, we wanted to make sure people got approval and not just get a building permit where there's no review at all. So I mean, those were the things we were attempting to do. And if anybody on the task force wants to modify what I said, please say that.
I guess I'd like to add to that. We looked at the basic rules that other communities use for demolition and when you can and why you would approve it. And the list that we put together, again, Bob, I totally agree. We are open to tweaking this or changing this as need be. But the very first thing in the list is public safety. Demolition can be ordered for public safety because of unsafe or dangerous conditions. So that was the first thing, and that's pretty common.
Yeah.
So I guess, I think, it's 4:40. We've got another meeting coming in at 5. I'd like to try to discuss maybe what steps going forward. I like Bob Van Stone's suggestion about adding a provision in there. Maybe we run just this by Ed with that provision and see how he responds to it. I'd kind of like at this point maybe be a scribe. If I can find a piece of paper in all my paper, and kind of take some notes about next steps we might have.
One of the real questions I had, anticipating this meeting and realized there would be some issues, is if we can agree that we agree with this document in a broad brush, in principle, not maybe in all the details, do we want to work it within this committee? Or do we want to have the village solicitor put this into language and where it would go in the code, and then we can work on that. I mean, it's a process question, but, you know, where does the committee want to go with that?
Bill, Bill Brown, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just want to say one thing that I'm wondering if we could all agree, and this is, do we all agree that historic preservation is a concept worth doing? And if it is, it generally means that you are going to step on, to some degree, individual property rights. And let me say one additional thing about this notion about individual property rights. Some people like to carry that to an extreme, and they say it's my property and I can do whatever I want with it, anything. Well, that's a complete and total myth. You cannot. That is what zoning laws in this country are all about. So to some degree, no matter where you buy property, like in the middle of the desert someplace, there's going to be some kind of a restriction on your property as to what you can do with it. So what we're talking about here really is if historic preservation is an important concept, especially in a village like Mariemont, where we have architecture from an earlier age, and it basically defines the character of our community. You know, we're going to have to write some codes that basically, yes, it's going to step on the toes somewhat of individual property rights, but I can't help but think that most property owners see the larger benefit of that. And as long as, I mean, and Joe kind of made the point, as long as it's legal and we have legal precedent to back up what we're doing on the reasons of which we're doing it, I'm not sure that it's as big a problem as we think. I mean, I think it's a very doable thing, and I think it's something that's worth doing.
And I just want to bring up here, you know, I got this book from Beth, and it's entitled, and I'll hold up in a second after I read it, The Economics of Historic Preservation, a Community Leader's Guide. You know, and it basically is an entire book about the economic development benefits of historic preservation. So, you know, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I just got it this week, but it talks about, you know,
Hey, can I just step in here for a second and just kind of point out that, hey, you know, I understand that most of the people on this call are advocates for historical preservation. I understand that, and I appreciate all the work that everybody does in this. But there are some that this is not the biggest thing or the biggest issue that Mariemont is facing right now. And Bill, you and I both know that one of the biggest issues we're facing right now is the economics in this village.
Mm.
You know, we've got problems with our with the financials right now, and we've got to solve those problems. And I don't want to do something here that might impact those financials even deeper. And so I want to be very, very careful as we move forward on something like this, that we are thinking about the economics, because we want to make sure that people can still continue to come into Mariemont, not only buy for the historical aspects of the village, but they're actually able to live in the houses in a manner that they want to live in the future.
Mm.
And so, you know, we do have a little bit of a problem. Some of the housing stock was built 100 years ago. And I'll give the example of garages. I mean, you know, when these things were built, people barely had one car. And now they have several cars. And we have a problem in Mariemont that you don't even have enough parking space, or not parking spaces, but garage spaces and driveway spaces to kind of meet the current desires of a lot of the residents. So my caution here more than anything else is I don't want to scare away development that might be out there, that if we put too restrictive provisions into our code, that people say, I'm not going to go into Mariemont to do business.
Doug,
Joe,
Doug, would you like to comment, please? Yeah, Doug.
Who'd you say, Marcy?
Doug Mansler.
Oh, Doug. Yeah, Doug. I'm sorry.
Are you? I think you're muted.
Doug.
Can't hear you.
That's right.
to me, this doesn't appear that restrictive. I think there's a few things that are a little loose. What's that? Can you hear me?
Having a hard time here making this out.
Can you hear me?
That's better.
No? I'm on mute. Can nobody hear me?
We've got,
Yeah, I can hear you.
That's
Speak a
better.
little faster.
Okay. I don't know how to get that. I'm not on mute. Okay, sorry. To me, this
Good.
isn't that restrictive. I mean, when you look at it, there's a few things that are a little loose, actually, but I don't see that as restrictive. I mean, what Marcy was saying is the economic impact. I mean, there's study after study from the National Trust that shows how historic preservation actually is a positive, not a negative. And if you've got a developer that can't work with, this bit about demolition, maybe that's not the right developer for Mariemont.
And hey, Joe, to your point, I mean, about you don't want to restrict people who want to come in and buy houses and, live a more modern lifestyle. It's worth noting that even within the historic district, you can pretty much remodel the inside of a house any way you wish without getting a certificate of appropriateness. It's only the exterior stuff that we're kind of concerned with. So, in that regard, you're making an okay point, but I'm not. What we're talking about here is essentially a very light footprint that would blanket over the rest of the houses in the village that aren't, in the historic district.
Oh, Rex Beavis would like to speak, I think. Rex?
Yeah,
Rex?
I just wanted to add one thing in support of what the task force is doing. And that's just that the entire village is a National Historic Landmark. So anybody that's moving in kind of knows that or should know that. So I think that it is consistent with the fact that it's the whole village is a National Historic Landmark. And that probably is supporting, Marcy, what you were showing in the document you had there.
Yeah,
And that's a good point.
I wanted to comment to Joe Stelzer's point that, the realities, the economic realities he painted are very true and real. And obviously this document, this work was done prior to the whole coronavirus pandemic. And my intent is not to try to push something through in a time of crisis, but my intent also was, now that we're sort of coming out of it, the people who did this work deserved to, be heard and also just begin the dialogue. This is a complex, hard issue. And I guess we need to wrap it up in a few minutes here. And I'd like to see where people are feeling about next steps. Maggie, what's your opinion?
Overall, with regard to the exterior demolition section, mostly I like it a lot. There are a few little details that I think we can negotiate. So that's the base, that's where I am.
Do you have anything in particular right now that you want to mention, or?
I do think I really like Joe's idea of adding an F at the bottom with some language regarding economic impact. For B, where we talk about commercial property, where it says the owner can demonstrate to the satisfaction of the ARB that the building cannot be reused or cannot be a reasonable economic return, looks like there's an extra word in here, be gained from the use of all or part of the building proposed for demolition. I kind of feel like there's another piece to that, or that an alteration / demo is needed to obtain, an upgraded, or I don't know. I'd have to think on that one, but a word use, like a use where it's more modern and can give us a better return on the person's investment or for the person's business. And then I also, I'm going to say this at the risk of making people mad, I'm not sure. Oh wait, this isn't the part, never mind. I kind of think the appeals board should be not the planning commission.
Agree.
I mean, I think the flow of things is that the building commissioner gets an application and the building commissioner goes one of two routes. Recognizes that it's a historic building or a historic landmark, or that it's in a historic district and automatically refers it to the ARB, or uses his judgment and determines, I feel like this thing should be reviewed by the ARB because it's a potentially, contributing building like the one on Mount Vernon. And then refers it to the ARB, and that the ARB does their thing. And then if there's an appeal, I just don't know that the planning commission's the right place for it. Only because of the way things have worked kind of in the history here. I think that maybe.
If I can just inject that appeal board being the planning commission is one of the things that is part of the criteria for the state law. So we didn't decide that the planning commission should be the appeals board. Somebody else did.
Okay. Because I know in some parts of our code, the planning commission is the appeals board for things, and in other places it's council. And I don't know which one's right. It just seems strange.
Well,
But
Maggie, ultimately, council would be the final board of appeal. I mean, if you got two decisions at the ARB and the planning commission, you still have a right to appeal it to council.
they do. That's true.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, council would be the final arbiter. And I would assume even if you didn't get satisfaction from council, that's what the municipal courts are for.
County, right.
If it got out of hand.
Yeah.
But Maggie, let me ask you a question to your point. What are your feelings then? I mean, do you have objections to if the ARB were sort of the overseeing body to make decisions, when somebody comes in, applies for a demolition permit, and we ask to see the plans, Don looks at the plans and he says, geez, I'm not really sure. That would go to the ARB? I mean, are you good with that, or where do you think it should go?
No, I think that if the jurisdiction of the ARB is our historic districts and our historic
What I'm saying is that we may
landmarks.
have to expand the jurisdiction slightly to include,
Right.
The other areas.
And so this is where I come back to, I think we need to get our fundamentals in order first. I think we need more than a list, but like a really clear and updated and kept up to date, like yearly review type of list, but also map that Eileen was talking about, where we have contributing properties recorded. And then if they're no longer contributing properties, maybe we take them off or put them in a different color or whatever. So that we can look at our ratios, we can see what we have out there. We can see easily when somebody comes to us, what we're looking at. And we can go to say to a new resident, you bought this house, it's a contributing property to our National Historic Landmark status. This is the reason you're being put through this more rigorous process. I don't have a problem with doing that.
Okay, so can I just interject here for a second? So I think that, our time is running out. This has been a great initial discussion, and I thank everybody for participating. I think maybe what we can decide very quickly that we need, before moving forward on this legislation and even putting it into Ed's hand, maybe the task force, Eileen, could provide that information and we could have another meeting to discuss those things. How does that sound to everybody?
That works.
It's a plan.
Yep, I can do that.
Can I interject here real fast? What I would like to see, as far as information gathering here, is a couple things. Number one, that we bring more people to the table as we're taking a look at this. I'd like to see some developers at the table. I'd like to see some of the more active real estate people in Mariemont be brought to the table so we can get their input. Maybe we find some other citizens that want to interject on this process. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'd like to see is a little bit more benchmarking. How does our process or policies for demolition compared to others, not only for the demolition process, but also in the operation of the Planning Commission and ARB. I think that, the Planning Commission and ARB needs a deep review of what they're up to right now and what they're going to be doing in the future. I think we've had some weakness there in the past. And so I'm a big believer, and we've done this numerous times in the past couple months, about benchmarking Mariemont against other communities. And we probably need to do it with this thing if we're gonna make a pretty substantial decision here.
Well, I mean, we did do that to some extent already with using Beth and her expertise and also using Glendale.
Okay, but I guess I've heard within the past couple days that Glendale's Planning Commission and ARB are one. Is that the truth?
That's really not about the demolition today, and that's a subject for a different discussion. So, we've got about a minute here, and I think you bring up some good points. I think the task force probably needs to meet, given the comments that council has, and kind of come up with some next steps, and we'll meet again and see. Like I said, I don't want to push this during a pandemic. Do we want to set up a meeting, a future meeting about this, say, end of June or early July? And
I think that'd be good. And to Joe's point, I mean, certainly there's no harm in bringing in, some other opinions on this. And we can.
And I have spoken to at least one realtor that was Shelley Reed, and I encouraged her to participate because I say clearly there could be some modifications that would be beneficial. So I would encourage that. Marcy, what I guess I'd like to see is exactly what we need to do before the next meeting, because it's not clear to me at all what that is.
yeah.
I mean, that time frame, I have no problem with the meeting. It's just, I want to know if the task force needs to provide more information, what exactly that information is.
Well, I think, okay, so I'll have Joe submit his questions to me and Maggie submit her questions, and I will then submit for them to the task force, and we'll go from there.
Yeah,
That's great.
That'd be good.
All right, thank you, everybody. It's 5:00. We got to give Avia her time. So thank you for participating.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bill, do we sit? Oh, never mind. We're here. Okay.
There.
I'm going to listen in if you don't mind, Avia.
Sure.
Sorry if I stepped on your time at all.
What'd you say?
I'm sorry if I stepped on your time at all.
Oh, it's okay. I was like, I got it, a few minutes early, so I had everything set up, and I was just waiting and waiting to be let in.
I did that on purpose because, this is such a complex topic that I knew it could go on for hours and round and round and round. So I wanted to set a limit.
I
get. My children are still alive. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hey, while I've got you here, if I venture out to Kroger's tomorrow, do you need more flour?
I am finally good on flour, I think. Okay. But thank you. Let's see.
I think of you every time I enter the baking aisle.
Actually, I popped in there today just to get a couple of things. I hadn't been going, just ordering, but I just didn't have it together this week to put together an order. And then I kind of just wanted to see what they had, because I'm just getting tired of just not getting what I wanted. So
yeah,
and I didn't even make it down the flour aisle.
I
knew whatever I bought, I was going to. Eddie was working, so I knew whatever I bought, I was going to carry in myself and wipe down myself. And I just didn't get it.
Well, if it makes you feel better, they've just come out with the CDC has just come out with a thing that it's not readily transferred on surfaces. But
I saw that.
I was in the hardware store the other day mailing something package, and I saw bleach for the first time.
Oh my gosh.
I felt like it was a moral victory. I was like, oh my God, there's bleach.
Well, somebody needs to find me some hydrogen peroxide.
Are you out again? I have that bottle.
You have that bottle?
Yes. I don't use gallons of hydrogen peroxide. I'll bring it over. And on my health cake,
bring over your records.
Huh?
Did you guys just see the email that Amy sent?
Yeah,
I'm reading it right this second. That's what why I'm quiet.
yeah, it's a little late, but we'll deal with it. Hey, does
I'm,
anybody- I can't figure out how to make it grid. Is it because we haven't switched to the
Yeah,
meeting? Or
we can grid it. It'll grid automatically once he puts this sign down.
Yeah.
Okay.
well,
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. I'm
Is
not-
everyone here?
Oh, hi,
Yes.
Jason. Yeah.
Okay. I've got Marcy, Avia, Kelly, Maggie, Don, and Doug. Is that everybody that needs to be here, or?
I don't think Don and Doug do. I think they just didn't leave.
Okay.
They just didn't leave. Yeah.
Okay. I'm
Like
gonna go
that
ahead and.
Saturday Night Live skit, the things that wouldn't leave.
If you don't mind.
Thank
I'm
you
gonna
for your
stay
input
because I'm
today.
interested. Is that all right? Is it okay if
Oh,
I
yeah.
stay because I'm interested?
Yeah, of course. Yep, absolutely, Don.
Maggie, thank you.
Hey, my
For
dog
today.
is being bad.
What'd you say, Marcy? I'm sorry.
Thank you for today.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I'm not sure I was super helpful. I had a lot of. I
Coffee?
liked the show overall. It's gonna be fine.
Well, it's a complex issue, and it just, but, I think it's worth the dialogue.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks.
If you guys are ready, I can go ahead and drop this and you guys can get going.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks,
That's
Jason.
up to you guys.
Here we go.
Yep, we're ready.
I love it, Avia. I love it.
Oh, is that what? Oops. I didn't realize my camera. That's what's behind my desk. There we go.
No,
All right.
I want to see the artwork.
That is all the things that my children make for me.
That's awesome.
I
Well,
love
not
it.
all the things, but the things that make the cut. Okay.
The cut. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get started. This is safety committee meeting, whatever day this is, Thursday, May 21st, 5 o'clock. So the goal of our meeting today is to discuss 5G towers in the village of Mariemont. Specifically, our focus today and only focus is with regards to safety. That's why it was put into the safety committee. Further discussions, I'm sure, might need to be had at a different point. But today, we're just going to talk about safety. So with that being said, I did get a couple of questions from residents. I figured I can kind of say those, and then maybe we just talk to each. Some of the questions I think really overlap. So, and I guess before I get to the questions, really the purpose of why I guess it was put into the safety committee with regards to the 5G towers is if there was, any concern with regards to safety and 5G, and then really to also understand if Mariemont, has really any say, so to say, with regards to it, right? Which I think is really going to come down to be the biggest component of this today. So.
Agreed.
Anything, Kelly, Maggie, you want to add at this point?
Just did Ed answer your list of questions from yesterday? Because I think that really guides where we go.
He did. He absolutely did. Yeah. Yeah. And so it really goes along, and I have his letter too, which I won't read all of it. And honestly, it's very legalese, but
Letter,
it goes along.
which letter is that, Avia? Which letter is that? The packet from yesterday?
Yeah, the packet.
That thing? Yes.
Yeah. So what he said goes along with that. It's just, this is a little lengthy. We had a shortened, abbreviated, like give me the down low, right? Yes or no questions. So yes, I did speak to him, and so I can share you guys what that is. So I guess we could start there. We're gonna go through that, and then we can answer the questions if you'd like. Yeah. Okay. So my questions to Ed. So hold on, let me pull up my email to him just so I have them outlined there. Okay, so my questions to Ed, which, he's our solicitor, just for those listening, were one, can we even say that if we determined 5G not to be safe, or for really any reason at all, that we didn't want 5G in Mariemont, could we? I asked him for some clarification on the state lawsuit, which we got in the packet and we talked a little bit about today. My third question was, per our code book, can we dictate where poles or 5G devices go. And if we could, have them at certain distances from certain places, perhaps like homes, playground, schools, things like that. But really just, can we even dictate them? For, are there any communities that have successfully in our area successfully blocked it if when we could? And, any communities in our areas that did have it. So the very first and foremost piece, which I think is going to answer a lot of our questions today, is that we, Mariemont, as a, as our village, cannot stop 5G from coming into the village. We don't have the ability to do that. So that's the bottom line. There is no yes or no. Like, if we wanted to take some kind of a poll, if people wanted 5G or not, we can't. So that's the very short answer. We cannot stop 5G from coming. Thoughts, questions?
So what are we deciding today?
Right. So not much. So that's the first and foremost piece. I mean, we can't, they have the right of way to do that, the public access, and that's federal law. And so anything we can't, some of the questions I think we got, which we'll get to, I'll read them out, but any ordinance that we were to enact in Mariemont as an Ohio, as a Mariemont ordinance, or even tied to Ohio Revised Code, like that's going to trump, anything that we would put on our books.
We will get overridden.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So even if we determined that that's something we wanted to do, it's not something that we could do. So I asked very specifically on that.
Right.
Now, the good thing is, as long as, and I know, Don, you've, I think, had a bit of a conversation with them. And again, this is not for really our determinations today. And it is one of my thoughts about making a recommendation of where this goes further. But, they seem very, my understanding, very open to working with us here in Mariemont about the placement of where these 5G devices go. And so, I've looked at some data. Most of the time, it's just this device that sits on top of an existing light pole, things like that, not too invasive. And then in some places, they want to add, on a pole where they need it to be able to, have the service the way that they want it to. And so, we very well, might not want them in certain places. Perhaps, I don't know what these poles per se look like. Some of the drawings I saw was just a big green line. I'm pretty sure we don't want a big green tower, but it seems like, they'd be pretty open to working with us about where they need to go. It seems like per Ed's letter and per my conversation with him that, as long as if we could find a reasonable solution within, I think, like 100 feet of where something was supposed to go, that they'd be pretty open to working with us on where, those 5G antennas go. So, that, I think, for me, and Don, you might be a good answer for this one, where we might end up with, with a report on this, is that that it might be good to maybe refer to Public Works to work with you in your office and this company about, placement of them.
Right. I certainly agree with that. One of the, well, not one, a couple of the difficulties is that if you look at placement of existing 5G antennas, you can see some up on Miami Road, as a matter of fact, on the way from here toward Madeira. It's a telephone pole with an antenna on top of it. The antenna is 18 inches or 24 inches tall, and it's about 3 inches in diameter or so. And that's not too bad. If we use them, particularly in the vicinity of the square, if we can talk them into painting the poles green, that would at least help to alleviate some of the objectionable properties. The main thing I'm trying to do is get the boxes, which are about 2 feet wide and 2 feet or so tall and about a foot deep. They're substantial sized boxes that are on the pole, and they want to put them about 60 inches high off the ground. And so it's going to be right in the line of sight. I'm going to try very hard to try to get them to take those boxes and put them down close to the ground. So far, they've resisted it, but one other company that came in here said, "Oh, that's no big deal at all. There's no reason why we can't do that." So we're trying to see if we can negotiate those kinds of changes. And aside from the fact that we've got some ability to talk about where they go and where they don't go, that's about all we're going to be able to do.
Can I
Well,
ask
I should say there is one other thing. I'm going to try to avoid powering the antenna from above. We should be able to get power underground in Mariemont so that we don't have to run the wires over from the top to bring it down.
Yeah, absolutely. What were you gonna say, Kelly?
Well, when Don, you're referring to talking to they wanting to put stuff, who specifically are you speaking with?
Well, this is one particular company that wants to put towers in. We spoke to another company. I think it's a Tensis, I think is the name of it. And then there's another, the second company that has come in now. I apologize. I can't remember their name at the moment, but it's
Well, you could get that for us, though, right?
that's, I can get it for you. Yes.
Okay.
Are we stuck with one company, or can we pick the one that's the most cooperative?
I don't know that we have that choice.
Okay.
It appears that if a company wants to come in and put towers in, they have the, because of the state law, they apparently have the right to do that.
Okay.
What we're hoping that we can do is get towers placed in such a way that they can sell this is a tower company that's working with Verizon. I'm not sure that Verizon isn't the owner, but they don't want to pretend like they're the owner. They want to be able to pretend like somebody else is putting those in and it's not us,
Right.
But if they can sell space, if you want to call it that, time, space, whatever, on the antenna to Verizon and also to mobile and also to maybe somebody else, then we're in great shape. If they have to put in more towers because of the volume, then we're going to have more towers.
Can we determine that ahead of letting this happen? Can we ask? Like, if we ask, are they required to tell us the truth?
We can ask. Unfortunately, they don't know at the moment. I mean, for example, one tower someplace in the vicinity of Starbucks is going to be really busy.
Yeah.
They may come in at some time later after they find out and say they need a second tower to handle the volume. We don't know that.
Okay.
Now, Don, so this is one thing that, Ed did some research on, and that once we have a request to install a tower, we have to respond within 120 days. Otherwise, if we don't respond, it'll be deemed granted as a matter of course.
Right.
Have we had an official request to install a tower?
Yes, we have.
Do we have, do you know what?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. When I say official request, we have a diagram from a company of where they want to install the towers. They've given us that diagram and they've offered to come and discuss with us where. For example, they gave us 2 locations for a tower in the square, 2 locations for a tower over in Old Town, and so forth. And they're willing to come and negotiate with us where those towers go.
So I would assume, so we should maybe make sure we've got Ed in the loop on this, Don, but if that's an official request, which kind of sounds like it is, we have 120 days to respond or work with them and have this meeting set up. Otherwise, if we don't, then it'll just be assumed granted and they have the right to go ahead and do what they want to do.
Do we know when we got the diagram or the semi-official request?
Well, they originally came in and said they wanted to talk about it to do work in the vicinity of March. And of course, this is not March. They then came back and said it's going to be more like the 3rd quarter before we're ready. So they've said that much to us. But it's pretty clear that within the next month or so, we've got to make sure that we're negotiating with them before they come in and decide that the time's up.
Got you. So it's gonna be, it's my recommendation, Don, and I think you said you agreed that, following whatever, we decide here today, that we, put that part of that with, working with you into Public Works to work then. So I think then we could have a committee meeting in the Public Works arena with you, Don, with this group to really talk through that component of placement. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Kelly,
I
are
do
you okay
agree.
with that? If that's what we
I
recommend?
think that's worth talking about. The only thing that I might consider is, since there are multiple aspects to that, I think once we need to get some more information from Don as far as the timing, getting together with these people to talk about it. Might even be worth a committee of the whole.
Yeah, either or. I mean, I'm fine with whatever everybody thinks.
But I think it's, it's worth talking about as far as where it lands. But I think we've got to get a significant amount of more information, and really define our parameters before we can really throw it somewhere. I mean, from my perspective, what I'd like to get more information from Don as to who it is that wants to meet with us to talk about it, what our time constraints are. I mean, I know when we say official request versus just an inquiry, I guess we need to define those so we know when that 120 days starts ticking.
We actually don't.
Okay.
We've theoretically, the 120 days would be nearly up, except he's written back to us in an email. I'm keeping the email chain, but he's written back to us in an email and said, there's been some delays. We'll get back to you in the third quarter. And so we're presuming that the third quarter means that we've got to get our act together by August, make sure that we've had discussions with them.
Don, let's loop, if you can, loop Ed in on this, because Ed was surprised that I already had some documents about placement of poles, and so he was concerned about whether or not, that we'd had like an official request. So if we should probably loop Ed in just so that he can, give us an opinion about the time frame component, I would think.
Right. We've actually, I have put in a phone call to Ed about a week and a half or so ago, and I'm not sure that we're keeping up with our communication. I'll probably need to communicate with him by email.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you could make sure to copy those of us on the safety committee, because two of us are also on Public Works, so
Okay.
we kind of kill two birds with one stone, determining which way we go with this.
Right.
Yeah. And so if I can get, well, not if, I will, get my report together, in advance of our next meeting, which is next Wednesday, then, we can talk about it also in that council meeting as well, about whether or not, where exactly, which committee it goes to as well.
As far as the safety aspect, since we're all together, I know I found a couple of articles, and I know you both also did. What if we were to come up with some guidelines for just for Public Works or for the committee of the whole, wherever it ends up? Like, I know it talked about the decay of the radiation is exponential as you move away, and by the time you're 10 feet away, or what does it say, 10 meters, which is approximately 100 feet, you're pretty safe. So if we put together some guidelines using some of that data, just so that the Public Works people have a double check when they're negotiating spacing or placement, that they could use that. Is that possible?
I mean, ideally, we wouldn't want these, next to our residential homes and schools and playgrounds anyway, just from aesthetics.
Yeah.
From a
But
safety standpoint.
where are these things on the ground going? That's my concern. If they're like along a sidewalk, I guess is where I'm wondering.
They're planning to put them in the public right of way. And the public right of way in general is that space between the curb and the sidewalk.
And that's what I'm most concerned about now, because that's what, 3 feet wide. That's not.
Do we know how big the boxes are approximately?
Well, you're talking about a telephone pole with a meter box on it. And the boxes are currently, let's say, 2 feet tall, 1.5 feet wide, and 1 foot deep, approximately.
Yeah. So I don't know necessarily that it's a safety component from that. I mean, I think we've all done some research, but I mean, I definitely, I know that nothing's 100% definitive either, right? But I mean, even from a, to be cautious, but also from an aesthetics point, I mean, I think it makes sense. It behooves us in both cases, regardless of safety, to try and, influence the decision of these things as much as we possibly can for both of those factors, right?
I think this is definitely something we need to discuss in next week's meeting. And just kind of, because there's,
Yeah,
Marcy's economic.
things that, sorry, but one of the things that needs to happen probably is that some of the issues that people are concerned about with safety, somebody needs to define those safety issues really well so that we can deal with them. For example, if 15 feet away from the antenna is going to make people feel better, then why don't we insist that the poles are at least 15 feet tall?
So the thing is, there's not definitive science regarding this. You can find things out there that can say one thing or the other, but I think all three of us have been passing around and sending some scientific research and articles that we've been able to find. The mayor provided me some information. Both one of the residents, Jennifer Manzer, had provided some information as well. There's not really a definitive scientific guidelines with regards to that, with regards to not being safe.
Right.
Yeah, it's all, one will say one and another will say the complete opposite. And, it's probably somewhere in the middle. So.
Yeah, okay.
So, so we got through the first question. We talked about the lawsuit with regards to, well, we didn't really talk about it. We got to answer the first question, but with regards to the lawsuit, the Ohio did, this is what the letter was about, did try to reverse the decision of this, and that did not go through. So that's the status of the lawsuit. So basically that we can't determine, villages can't determine, that they can't can stop 5G from coming through. There's nothing in our code that would dictate where the poles would go or the devices. And even if we put something in the code book, it would, again, the federal statute would take precedence. Yeah. And Ed was not aware of any other communities that were able to successfully block it in our area. And there are definitely some communities that, already have 5G. So, so those were my answers to the questions. So let me just pull up just so we can go through back. Just a couple questions that we got from the residents. I think we've answered most of them, but.
Could I just add one comment to complicate the issue a little bit for you?
Sure.
When we talked to the other company who came in about a year ago, they wanted to put a pole similarly to the place. They wanted to put a pole close to where the Mary Emery block is, just east of the square. You know where that is? Just east of the Mary Emery
Memorial.
The memorial.
Right there, just next to the forest, if you will. They wanted to put a pole in that vicinity, just east of the square. We said, well, if what you're trying to do is reach Starbucks, why don't you consider putting it someplace rather than right in front of the forest? His point was that he thought if he put it over close to the trees, that it would be less visible. That's obviously a matter of opinion. We suggested at the time that maybe the thing to do would be to put an antenna on top of one of the light poles that's on the square.
Right.
Because the pole's already there, it's the right color, and so forth and so on. But at the time, they were telling us that the control box that I've told you is 2 feet by 18 by a foot, they were telling us that this thing was only 10 inches wide. And so we thought that that would be no big deal. Now that we know that the control box is significantly larger, we're not sure that putting an antenna on top of a light pole is still a decent option. However, if we can get them to put it on the ground, it may still be a viable option. So part of what I think we need is an idea as to whether people think, are we doing ourselves a favor or a disfavor by putting an antenna on top of a historic pole? Because the poles in the square are part of the historic district that are labeled.
Right. And so I think that's going to be a question for Public Works or the Committee of the Whole, wherever we decide that this should go.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there's a lot to work through here.
There's a lot of
And I think,
pieces to this puzzle.
yeah, and I think we're all in agreement that we want what's best from our village, aesthetically, as well as, for other reasons too. So I think we're all in agreement on that. Okay, so I pulled up the questions. I have the first set of questions from Jennifer Mansler, for pronouncing that correctly. She lives on, usually we say what street. What street is that? Lytle Woods.
She's Bill's neighbor.
Yes, right. Her first question was if the
Oh,
safety
my gosh.
subcommittee would draft an ordinance that would prohibit any small cell facility, whether freestanding tower or attached to any already existing utility pole or lamppost, within 100 feet of a residential dwelling, and require a minimum distance of 1,500 feet between small cell facilities. So that was her first question. I think from what we've understood and what we've discussed and what, I spoke with Ed today, our solicitor, is that we actually can't do that. But that, we can, work with the company that they should be, as long as we're working with them, they should be pretty open to trying to appease us and meet our needs of what we want to do. And I guess typically per the regulations that if you're within, if you can try and be within 100 feet where they want to put a pole, they're going to be much more reasonable as well. So we can't actually draft an ordinance. It would be valid.
Yeah, do no good.
Right, exactly. Her second question is, can the subcommittee address the discriminatory nature of PeakNet's proposed plan to locate all the small cell facilities on the north side of the village and in a highly concentrated manner, 500 feet apart? This is unfair and discriminatory and will put residents on the north side of the village at much higher risk to their health from the radiation coming from these small cells. Distance is key with all cell tower and wireless radiation, and much higher risk of deterioration to their property values. Any agreed upon small cell facility plan should have these facilities placed evenly throughout the village and at a greater distance apart. So not 100% exactly sure of the question, but I think
I can help with that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tom.
You have to see, I'm sorry I didn't have one to show you some way, but if you look at the placement of the cell towers, there's one in the square, there's one down further than Starbucks, down in the center of the village. Then there's another one over in Old Town, and then there's another one down by Beach Street, and there's one up in the vicinity of Murray Avenue and so forth. But you notice everything I've talked about is either on Worcester Pike or north. They don't have any located south of Worcester Pike. Well, part of the difficulty is that from the square south is less than 500 feet. So they can reach the entire village by putting an antenna in the square. Now, quite frankly, I think the southeast side of the village could very well be attended to by an antenna that's outside the village that we're not going to have any control over. But if they put one down in front of Ace Hardware, for example, it'll get the south side of the village and that southeast corner without being in the village. It won't be one that we have any control over. But essentially, the point I'm making is that the picture that this person has seen is a picture that shows all the cell towers on the north side of the pike.
And so I think, again, you know, it sounds like obviously there's a reason for that. I'm not sure that it's, I understand it all, but would be for, you know, either the committee of the whole or the public works committee, you know, working with you, Don, in that company about, you know, placement and if, you know, if that is indeed, you know, the right places to put them, right?
Right, right.
I mean, we only have so much say. Again, we only have so much say, but you know, we can at least try and influence where
Right.
we can. I mean, obviously, we want the minimum amount of towers we possibly can have.
Certainly, we can point out to them that they're behind a building or that there's a number of tall trees in this area or whatever to assist in influencing them where we might want to put them. But
Yeah.
then that presumes that we know where we want to put them, and we don't know that yet.
Right. Okay.
And I think one of the if I'm understanding correctly, one of the problems with putting them south of the pike is, number one, like if they put them along Miami Bluff, they're basically sending out signal into the floodplain, which is, and also the underground utilities pose a difficulty, much more expensive to access.
That's correct.
How I understand it.
Will that area be served, Don, though? Like, will all of, I'm only picking the Bluff because it's like the farthest reaches, but will the far east and west side of like South Petoskey and South, you know, I guess down by the pool, and like the end of Mariemont Avenue, will they be served by this 5G service?
Well, if we allow them to put these things in and they go in and install them basically all at the same time, within 2 or 3 months of one another anyway, however long it takes them to get them in, then the towers are in place. And the company that you were talking about, the company that was asking about the poles, is not, they're not a communications company.
Right.
So they may be an arm of Verizon, we don't know that, but basically they put the poles in and then Verizon has to come and decide they're going to install 5G into the system.
Right.
They'll buy time on
Are they set up to serve though? Are they set up in a way that would radiate everything like equally through the village, and everybody in the village who wants the service can get it if they want it?
These are antennas that are designed to radiate 360 degrees. Yes.
Okay, so nobody's gonna have like less or more or whatever.
Right. The only way anybody gets more is to be closer to a cell tower.
The antenna, right? And then are these boxes, is there a box for each antenna, like these control boxes, or is there one per how many ever antennas, or?
No, there's a box on every pole.
Okay, so those are big.
Wow.
Okay.
I'm getting a
So we
lesson
also see,
from your husband.
Fiber and antenna.
Okay, never mind. He's not going to join us and show his little diagram. So. No, never. Yeah, save that for the next meeting, okay?
yeah, I mean, I do have this diagram that, I don't know if you can see it, that Bill gave me.
So what is that? That's like a description of the poles themselves?
Yeah, and then I think, is that the box, I think at the bottom?
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
There's two different kind of styles.
Is that obvious? Is that something we could make copies of, or I can't tell the size of that?
Yeah, no, it's 8.5 by 11. I would have sent this all to you guys, except for he just dropped it off at my house, and I just don't have the ability to make color copies.
We have copies of those. We have copies of those in the office. either Eileen or I, one way or another, can get back into the office and make sure that we get copies to all of you.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so that'll be great. And yeah, Bill dropped these things off, but I just didn't have any other way of sharing. So, okay. So then we received an email from Amy Ackerman, Elm Street. It was on Elm Street. Just, right before our meeting today, she had a few questions. Her first question was, how have the 3 committee members learned about 5G, how it works, how different than current 4G, and why the potential safety/health risks are significantly different than 4G. What resources, studies, etc., will help you with your recommendation. A lot of this honestly comes down to, really doesn't come down, I don't think, to safety with regards to this, because we really don't have much of a say about where, if these things come and where they go. But I know I did, my own research. Maggie and Kelly will get to speak to them themselves as well, but did their research. I know we forwarded each other different articles. Some folks sent research to us. And so, I don't have all the specific details of every article I read in front of me, but definitely quite a few. And I'd say the majority of them were pretty consistent with regards to the safety of it not being, a major concern, to put it. But Maggie, Kelly, if you want to add anything.
I think
Well,
Grace
I
said
just
pretty
wanted
much.
to go ahead, Meg.
Oh no, I was saying, I think I passed everything I read on, and I got a lot of stuff from everyone else. So, and the residents also. So I feel like a lot, I think most of us saw similar articles, and what I saw was, there are definitely concerns that certain people have, and then there's just not a definitive ruling about the safety, but the general consensus is that it is not it's a short wave that decays quickly as you move away from it. And as long as you're far enough away from it, you're okay. So it's not going to endanger the community as a whole. But I do believe there's value in looking at putting it out of, right next to people.
And Kelly, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to make a comment that, I'm dogs, and looking at Amy's email, the timing that we got it, I have not had the opportunity to read it and digest it, because there is a lot of information on it. I think some of the questions are the same as Jennifer's, which we've kind of addressed. But again, at the end of the day, we need more information. I mean, comparing the 5G to the 4G, I couldn't answer that question because I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to guess this is a good meeting to initiate a conversation. I've gotten a lot of information from Don that I think we need to pursue. That's going to be very helpful. But I think we'll be better to answer these questions once we have that additional information.
I don't think it's anything from a safety perspective, though, that in this committee that we can address. I think it's more about trying to influence where those towers go for a variety of reasons.
Well, my engineering husband just volunteered to help out with getting more information. So
I can write the whole thing.
He's on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a ton. I know we all have. I know we're trying to keep it brief, but I feel
not going to do it for free.
Okay. And then her next question was similar to with Jennifer about trying to make sure that there's she would like for there to be 1,500 feet between the small cells, 300 feet from residential dwellings. Same, similar, less residential areas. I mean, I don't disagree with that from a principal perspective, but again, it's not something that, we can, put an ordinance in place to do, but, we can try and influence as best we possibly can to have them, in places that make better sense for the village. I mean, I think we all agree that we don't no one wants one of these on top of their house. So, okay. So I think that's it. So, I mean, my recommendation, again, is that, you know, we move forward with, you know, we're trying to work with the company, work with Don in regards to placement of the towers to be in the best, you know, consideration of the village. And so if that, good.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, if you could get us whatever information you have, and then we can just get some more information on it. And yeah, but I do think it would be prudent to throw it out in Monday's meeting just to let everybody know that we're talking about it. And there are definitely going to be many angles that we come at this from.
Right. And so my recommendation would be for us to address it either as a, you know, either in the Public Works Committee or as a committee of a whole, whatever, you know, I'll put both of those suggestions in my report. We can decide on Monday where it does go.
Right.
But from a safety standpoint, you know, I think we're in agreement that, one, there's not much that we can do. And two, you know, what we have found is it's pretty minimal risk. But three, you know, we're not in disagreement that, you know, we would prefer to have these towers in places that aren't close to residential homes and you know, and several of the things that were, you know, outlined, and so that we can try and influence those as much as we possibly can by, you know, working with them. So. Agreed?
Agreed. Concur.
Maggie?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Dom?
No, I don't think so. You've said pretty much the same thing. I looked at the possibility of a tower on Elm Street, for example, and the fact that people who would be right in the vicinity of the tower either love it or don't, depending on whether they're worried about the safety. But if you take that tower and put it all the way down at the end, over, for example, near the churchyard or something like that, you've got a couple of huge trees there that are going to be a reasonable block to the signal. And whether that's going to be an issue or not is really a matter of what's beyond the tree. So it's not going to be a simple issue, particularly since we've got trees coming and going. If a tree, a substantial size oak tree, is going to block the signal, I'm afraid that we're looking at some number of poles going in now, and then when people don't have a signal, if they complain loudly enough, they're going to be back and say we have to put in more poles.
I know I've spoken to a few residents since this has come up, and they want 5G. Nobody wants a hideous pole, but they really want 5G. So it's going to be a balance, as always, figuring it out. But, yeah. So I just like to thank Jennifer and, you know, Amy for their email, and Jennifer for her concern. I know she submitted a lot of information. Just know that, you know, we appreciate it, but that, you know, there's, I think the best course of action, you know, will be kind of look at my recommendation to address this as a whole, and hopefully we're able to, you know, accomplish maybe a couple of the things that she'd like to see, just even from, you know, an aesthetic standpoint, not so much a safety standpoint as well. So, okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.